Thanks, Jackson, for that reading. There is a long-standing wisdom among pastors that trips are often the mountaintop experiences of our faith journeys, both for young and older members. Whether the trip is for mission work or a pilgrimage, maybe just to the zoo or to go on a retreat, it almost doesn't matter because it's the van ride that makes all the difference, as long as we're willing to leave the iPad off for a moment anyway. We may play games or sing songs or learn about what we're passing. We may nap or snack or just chat. It's on the van ride that we get to know each other differently as we traverse unfamiliar landscapes. It's on the van that we hear one another's stories and tell our own, weaving in and out until we are a tapestry of community. It's where we make new stories together and learn what it means to be a part of this faith family. Our text for today is a road trip of sorts. Compared to how far most of us travel every day, it doesn't sound like a long journey, just 7 miles or so. But that's a couple hours of walking at a pretty decent pace. And if you're talking while walking, maybe caught up in grief and uncertainty, it might take you even longer. It had been a wild ride for Jesus' friends and followers. From listening to him teach and seeing him heal, to being a part of the ministry and the movement that he was creating, every day their hopes were raised, their expectations soared, their minds and hearts overflowed. But then it all came crashing down in ways that were so horrible they couldn't even have imagined it. For the one who was to redeem became the one on the cross. It was inconceivable, and yet there it was. For the body to be missing, and for the rumors that Jesus had been sighted, all of this now happening and unfolding in the morning, for them was inconceivable. And so these two friends, Cleopas and another, head out on that same day for Emmaus. We don't know much about these followers of Jesus. We also don't know why they were leaving. In fact, also, unlike many other biblical place names, we don't know exactly where the town of Emmaus was located. What we do know is that these men are traveling away from the locked room where others that afternoon will experience the risen Christ. And while they are walking, they are participating in that almost sacramental rite of remembering. As they walk, they talk. They talk about what they had experienced that week. When someone you love dies, you tend to talk about him or her. You tell stories, many of them old and much told stories. Remember the time Remember when she said? It's part of why we have those receptions and gatherings after a memorial service, so we can sit down together and tell the stories and remember. But their stories today are full of dismay and confusion as they walk and talk and try to make sense of what has happened to them. Perhaps in that they found a little comfort, as you do when you know you're not completely alone in your grief, but they don't find much. We can sense that in their incredulity when this stranger approaches and begins to walk alongside them and asks what they are talking about. Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days? They ask. And the sadness and the disbelief as they narrate the events of the last few days. But we had hoped, they say, speaking to this valley of dashed hopes and shattered dreams that they are walking through in this moment. But then the stranger laughs. Well, the text doesn't say Jesus laughs, but I always imagine, Jesus with a smile in his eyes chiding the disciples' foolishness and knowing that he is about to change their sorrow into joy. "Oh, but let me tell you," he begins, and then gives them a great gift. He shares with them the scriptures, interpreting to them the narrative of salvation. He takes their little bit of the story and places it within the context of God's grand story, of Moses and the prophets, of exile and return. Suddenly, they are not on a road just two alone, carrying a burden of sorrow, but they're on a road with thousands, hundreds of thousands, who had experienced oppression and yet liberation, distress and yet succor, fracture and yet healing, with the hand of God moving through it all, gently nudging towards redemption. And so there is hope. Poet Maria Howe remembers as a child paging through a book of the saints, a little devotional, looking for that comforting feeling of not being alone in the world. The resurrection is the capstone story of our faith. But it is not the only story. We can find many stories of God's work in our world, stretching before it and after it. God's grand narrative reaches back to the void at the beginning of time and spreads as wide as the eyes can see and the heart can feel. We don't exist apart from that story. We are indeed a part of it, embedded as a single note in a grand score. It is this which connects us most profoundly with each other and with the magnificent created order. Howe explores the sense of connectedness in her poem Singularity. I'd like to share with you a reading of that poem, set to illustrations by Alina Skoreko Wagner, animated by Marina Lopez, with a soundtrack by Zoe Keating.
Let me think. When I was talking with Maria about doing something this evening, I just jotted something in my journal, really, and I told her I wanted to read Walt Whitman, and but I just sort of sent this thing too, and she said, "Oh, read that." And I said, "I don't know. Usually I wait about 10 years before I read anything out loud, and this has been about a week." Anyway, I don't know anything about science. I've tried to read these books. My daughter, however, loves physics. I don't understand that. But I was trying to get her to explain to me what the singularity is. And I was reading Hawkins, of course, and then I was trying to read Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. I said to her a few weeks ago, "I don't believe in the Big Bang." And she said, "You don't?" I said, "No, it's impossible." Who here really believes that we were all, everything that ever is, was once a singularity so dense it was one thing before it blew up? Raise your hands. Okay? See, just like not that many over there. So here it is, the singularity. Do you sometimes want to wake up to the singularity we once were? So compact, nobody needed a bed, or food, or money. Nobody hiding in the school bathroom, or home alone, pulling open the drawer where the pills are kept. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. Remember? There was no nature, no them, no tests to determine if the elephant grieves her calf, or if The coral reef feels pain. Trashed oceans don't speak English or Farsi or French. Would that we could wake up to what we were when we were ocean. And before that, when earth was sky, and animal was energy, and rock was liquid, and stars were space, and space was not at all, nothing. Before we came to believe humans were so important. Before this awful loneliness. Can molecules remember it? What once was, before anything happened? Can our molecules remember? No I, no we, no one, no was, no verb, no noun yet, but only a tiny, 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 tiny dot brimming with is, all, everything, home. Thank you.
Does it give us hope to know that we are bound together on our journey? That the divine love which swirled over the waters of creation erupts again and again and again in our world? That it wraps its tendrils through our collective consciousness and moves through our historical memory, beckoning us into an unfolding future? Were our hearts not burning? Were our hearts not burning? The disciples ask in wonderment. As with many things, the recognition, the understanding happens after the event. In the reflection, it begins to all make sense. Not much makes sense these days. Maybe one day we will see the patterns of good emerging out of all of this awfulness. But maybe today is not that day. But as we continue our own pilgrimage through this time of disease and distancing, I hope we may find hope in this story, which is our story, and also God's story, a story that gently reminds us that we are not alone in this world, that we are met on our journey by companions and by our God, that we are fed at a table and filled with the Spirit, and one day may our own hearts burn with understanding as we glimpse God's redemptive work, transforming even our today.